Start the show. So a warm welcome everyone here and everyone watching the recording later. Yeah, fantastic to have the topic one going on.
Sure.
Fantastic to have Dave once again with us. Thank you so much. Hope everything is going well in the PBL groups out there. And if not, yeah, keep on working on it. You will get there, and then so you can focus soon on the content, so to speak. But enjoy the ride and let us know if we can help out in any way. So, but for today, digital literacies and online participation, and our friend of the show and international expert David White with us.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yes.
Uh,
And we always sort out the title and online here. I have you as the head of digital education and academic practice.
no, I'm Dean of
No.
Academic Strategy now.
Oh,
Yeah,
strategy. Ah, wow.
fancy,
You're
right?
moving up the ranks from
Yeah, well,
every
COVID didn't do
iteration.
me any harm. We'll put it that way. Right, I'm going to share my screen, but my screen setup's changed since the last time I
Yeah,
did
while
it.
you do
Like,
this, I'll just say you're the also the president. You're at the University of Arts London, and you are also the president still of UK's Association of Learning Technology, ALT,
yeah, yeah.
which is yeah the one of the key bodies and hubs for educational technologists around the UK, but also internationally, I'd say. Yeah, great to have you with us, Dave, and take it away
Okay,
once you sorted out your screen.
well, I've created a situation already with my screen. Hello, everyone. I've created a situation with my screen. So, because I've got a weird setup that I thought was clever, and it's just causing no end of problems. So, I might see if I can just share the application. If I share that, is that is that reasonably kind of that'll probably work okay, won't it? And then you can sort of see what's coming along next and whether I've made any weird notes. Is that legible enough?
Yeah, and if you maybe press on the button on the right, the arrow
That
up,
fella.
then we don't have to see the,
Oh, yeah.
for
Gotcha.
instance, then it gets
Yeah,
even better. But
let's do it
that
this
should
way.
be working perfectly.
Yeah, you don't want the first 7 minutes of this session being me trying to rearrange my screens.
Ah,
Um, so hello everyone, and welcome to to this session, online participation in digital literacies. So what's going to happen is a bit of me kind of framing things, introducing some ideas, some of which you might have encountered before. Uh, and then we're going to do a mapping exercise, the visitor and residence mapping exercise together. And I got a couple of questions to ask you. I'm just going to dig around and find the chat window because I'd welcome you. I'd really encourage you to chat whilst I'm talking in the text chat, or if you've got something that's easier to talk through by getting on a microphone, then please do that as well. So if there's any questions you want to ask at any point, or if you just want to make a point, or you've got a reflection from your own work, anything that you want to contribute, drop it in the chat window. I'm keeping an eye on it, and we'll work that way. So the more you talk, the less you have to hear me talking, which I think is probably a good thing. Let's find out. So yeah, that's sort of to say we will be doing a thing together fairly shortly, but I will warn you when that's about to happen. So I will literally do a really friendly thing where I'll go, this is the bit that's worth paying attention to. Otherwise, I'm going to say, okay, get on with that. And you're going to go, oh, oops, that's the bit I didn't pay attention to. So I'll be super friendly about it because I'm normally that guy who forgot to pay attention just at the key moment. So this is a quote to sort of kick us off, and it's from Kevin Kelly, who is like sort of one of the sort of old school original sort of internet futurists. And normally I'm not into futurists because they say things like, you know, robots are going to take all our jobs and Skynet's going to become self-aware and all that sort of nonsense. But this is a quote from 1997, and it's kind of come true. We're now engaged in a grand scheme to augment, amplify, enhance, and extend the relationships and communications between all beings and all objects. And that's essentially what the internet has done. And that has had a massive effect on the way we go about teaching, the way we go about learning, culture, democracy, all of these things. We've connected people to people, things to things in just about every angle imaginable, and it has this huge implication. And what's interesting about this is that it's all happening virtually. And so it means that each of us holds a different image of the internet or the web or our devices or our networks. We each hold a different image of that in our minds. We have a different way of conceptualizing it in our minds. Whereas if we think about a road network, we do conceptualize it differently, but also most people would think about driving along a road or walking along a path, and it's more of a shared thing because it's fundamentally visual. So one of the things that Kevin Kelly did a while ago was he set up the Internet Mapping Project, where he basically said to people, draw a map of the internet as you see it and indicate your home. That's all it was. And what's fascinating about it is that everybody comes up with a slightly different answer or a different flavor of answer, which kind of highlights the fact that we don't have a particularly shared conception of all of this virtual connected stuff. So I'm just going to show you some of the maps from that project to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So here's one that I think of as sort of the sort of infrastructure hardware map. It seems to be wires and servers and computers, and then their home is a laptop on a Wi-Fi. That's from a 12-year-old. So that's one version of what we might think the internet is. Here's another one that's sort of more squirrely, little squares on it. Are they websites? Are they bits of information? Are they pages? You know, one of the intriguing things about the internet is everything's a metaphor. So that's our only way of dealing with the virtual is to use a lot of metaphors. But look, there's another version of an answer to that question. And then this one, I like this one. I don't know what's happening. Is that like a massive pipe of information that's being squeezed through a laptop? Who knows? And then blasted out the other side. I don't know, but there you are. This is from somebody who's a bit older, I think. And then the last one I'm going to show you. These are lying around on the internet. I think there's a Flickr group on this stuff, and they are interesting. There's lots of different interpretations. Then the last one is it's just a bunch of happy people floating around and instead of indicating their home, they've indicated themselves. So I mean, this is from a little while ago. So this is before social media went toxic, right? I don't know how many people remember when the internet had more happy people on it, but there you go. So this is the sort of technologically disintermediated version of the idea, you know, is that the internet is just a collection of people. And the technology is not what's important. What's important is that it connects people in this big constellation. So that's a legitimate answer to the question. And just to jump back, that's a legitimate answer to the question. They're all legitimate answers. My point being really that when we're talking to colleagues or to students, we don't know which one of these models they have in their head, right? And the model that they have in their head will also relate to their own philosophy of education, their own thinking about what the affordances of online education might be as opposed to face-to-face education. Nobody drew the filter bowls, no. Well, maybe they did. I've just taken a little sample there. So there was one that I saw that was just a giant webcam camera staring through a window, and it was very disturbing. So there was one that was like pure surveillance, which was interesting as well. So, you know, all these models exist in people's minds. And I'd say that those models are less shared than perhaps our model of our physical institutions, perhaps, because there's a great cultural and social history about our physical institutions, but all of this stuff is still brand new in that sense. So just teeing that up, just putting that out there. And then in terms of a kind of educational framework or theory, yet another triangle. This one's useful. This one's from 2010, but it's got a longevity to it. I keep coming back to this one because I think there's a useful truth to it in that technology and things move on, but this stays useful. And the reason that I put this up here, I find it a useful model because it's got identity at the top. And my educational philosophy, different philosophy, or lots of different philosophies are available. My one is that education is a process of becoming, it's ontological, and the simplest way of characterizing that is to say, when our students leave our institutions, they're not the same person that they arrived as, in a good way, we hope. And I think most people would agree that if they are exactly the same person when they leave, we probably something hasn't worked, right? So what's useful about this model is that it's got access, awareness, skills, practices, which is a useful word, and identity at the top. Okay, and I'm going to spend most of this session talking about the pointy bit at the top, practices and identity. But I just want to be really clear that access and awareness and skills, you need a kind of foundation of that before you can get at practices and identity. Not entirely. It's not as simple as a straight ladder. Actually, we're kind of constantly rotating around these things as we learn and we engage, hence the arrows. So that's the other thing I like about this model. It's both a triangle and a circle, which is like playing it both ways in educational terms. So maps, triangle, these are just to give us a little bit of a background. Now, before I get stuck into where we're headed with the mapping exercise, I'm just going to briefly do a generative AI call out. Now, what's interesting is how it's interesting to me because how many of these sessions do we do a year? Is it 2 or 3? I can't remember.
2.
2, yeah. So this is an interesting moment in time for me because I can remember doing previous versions of this session and how quickly our feeling about generative AI has shifted over the interim, right? So I spoke about this the last time I ran this session. Actually, I feel less need to call it out because I think actually the discourse around generative AI has sort of settled down a little bit. But I just wanted to say, yes, it's out there. It's not intelligent. It's not particularly creative. And I've written a couple of blog posts. So rather than discuss it in detail here, I've written a couple of blog posts that you might be interested in. One of them is called No Good Horse, which is about creative arts and AI, which is that there's no such thing as a good picture of a horse. That's part of our pedagogy. You can read it to see what I mean. And therefore that is interesting, the relationship between creativity and AI. The other one, which is really a simple idea, which is essentially the problem isn't the technology. The problem is the way that it's characterized to give us an idea that we have this zero-sum future whereby humanness is gradually being eaten away by technology, and what it means to be human is getting smaller and smaller. I completely disagree with that. And if you look at the history of the relationship between technology and humanness, generally speaking, what happens is technology enables humanness to evolve, change, get bigger, become richer, become more terrible, but it's not this idea that the robots are coming for you and being human doesn't mean as much as it used to because look at how clever this technology is. I think it creates a very unhelpful and very anxious environment from a sort of learner point of view and for all of us. So that's a bit of a side note. So coming back round, I'm going to get to the mapping shortly. I don't know how many of you have heard of that. I have to say, that is a terrible picture of a horse. so that's that I don't know if that proves my point. Maybe I shouldn't talk like that. Maybe there's no such thing as a good or a bad picture of a horse, and that isn't the point. So maybe I shouldn't say that, but just that one's awful. So anyway, Not really the point. So, how many people have heard of the digital natives idea? Can you just sort of give me a yes or a no in the text chat, just to give me a sense of it? Digital natives, digital immigrants. If you can get to the text chat, yes, no, okay, right, yeah. Right, okay. I tell you what, I'm going to say it because I love this, right? I love asking a yes, no answer because then everybody says yes or no in the chat. And as soon as I see them appearing, I feel like I'm in a room with people in a way that's much more compelling than the webcams. So I won't go into it in detail, but in around about 2000, Mark Prensky basically came up with this idea that he said there are digital natives and immigrants. Natives have were probably born at a time where digital technology was around them when they were young, so that it's just part of the world to them. Immigrants are people who are slightly older, and so the technologies appeared in their lifetime, and they've had to learn the technology probably as adults. It's actually a metaphor of language. It's not entirely unuseful, but I mean, I'm discussing this now. That was supposed to be a question, but given that everybody said yes, there's no point discussing it. It's fine. I've just undone part of my own teaching there, but you know, I'm happy to commentate on the pros and cons of my own teaching. So I think it's actually a metaphor of language whereby it was sort of about fluency, as if you were a native, because it doesn't often get translated this way, but when you look into it, it's quite a sketchy idea. But actually, when you look into it, there's this thing that is sort of saying that if you're a native, then it's a bit like you're speaking in your first language with technology. When you use technology, you're kind of fluent in it. And if you're an immigrant, then you might be really good at speaking the language, but actually it's still slightly more conscious and slightly more learnt. What it came to mean was old people aren't good with technology. So it became like a generational concept, which then immediately sort of stopped being useful because actually, if you were to think about it in a very limited way, then I'd say natives are probably now in their late 40s, early 50s. So, you know, what does it really mean? Okay. A colleague of mine, I can't remember who this was, said, look, you see, the trouble with this is going to really annoy me because I'm going to get rid of that. It's just annoying. We confuse ownership with capability. I think this did happen. I think it happens less now, which is the sense that maybe 10, 15 years ago, we'd see our students arriving with phones and tablets and laptops that were slightly better than ours. And we'd imagine that meant they had certain sort of digital literacies and capabilities, which wasn't actually true. They just owned some cool technology, right? So it meant there's this period in history that we're somewhat past now, whereby higher education decided to not support students in their use of technology because it had this useful excuse of being able to say, oh, the kids understand that, and we're just dinosaurs, and they know it all. But clearly that wasn't the case because just owning a fancy phone or being really good on Instagram doesn't mean that you know how to do desk research. But we sort of conflated those ideas. Okay. In 2017, I did this sort of on-stage panel with Mark Prensky, who came up with the idea, and I just found it very vexing. I'm not going to go into it. But in response to that idea, I proposed this idea of visitor and residence, which instead of being based on the idea of age, it was based on the idea of motivation to engage. So my approach was to say your fluency with technology is driven by what you think you're trying to achieve in various different ways. So to give you a really simple example, if you've got, you know, if somebody's grandchildren move country, then the grandparents suddenly become quite good at Zoom, right? Or good enough because they have a motivation to engage, right? So it's very simple in that sense. And what I'm going to do is we're just going to do this mapping workshop that we developed a while ago. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to very quickly lay out what I mean by the continuum of visitor and residence, and then I'm going to ask you to draw your own visitor and residence map. which I've done with various different groups, staff, students, and it's just quite a useful, quick, reflective exercise. So I hope that's okay. Do drop any notes into the text chat if you want any clarification or what you know, or if you've got any questions you want to ask or comments you want to make. So visitor and residence is a continuum. It's not two boxes. It's not two separate people. It's two different modes of engaging online, and it's like a sliding scale, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe in simple terms, because it is quite simple, either end of that continuum, because it's the easiest way of getting into it. So when you're in visitor mode, and see how you, while I'm explaining this, just have a think about how this might relate to the way that you engage or not. So when you're in visitor mode, you're largely seeing the web as a series of tools. So you've got a job that you need doing, and you're going online. You're opening up the sort of untidy toolkit of the web. You're picking the right tool. You're doing a thing, and then you're sort of stepping away from it. So importantly, it doesn't leave a social trace. It doesn't leave a social trace on the surface of the internet, if you like. It'll leave a data trace, but not a social trace. So things like searching for information, reading information, watching videos if you don't comment, a lot of shopping's like this. And then I'll come back to the last one. Banking's a good one. Okay. Let's have a look. Okay, I'm just going to open up what's being posted if I can. Oh, well, now I've ruined the screen share. I can't read that, but we'll come back round to it in a minute. How do I get back to where I was? How exciting. I'm going to hit escape. Whee! If in doubt, hit escape. We'll come back to that. That looks interesting. So yeah, visitor mode. So something like banking is a really good example of visitor mode because clearly that's you know, not a social thing. The other end of the continuum, resident mode, is where you're conceptual. I mean, you're not doing this directly, but in some senses, the web becomes a series of spaces or places. So if you think about the Internet Mapping Project, the resident mode's a bit more like all the smiley faces. Okay, it's more that end of those maps. Your motivation to go online is to connect with and engage with other people. It's about people, right? You will leave a social trace online. You know, that idea of the digital footprint, all of that kind of stuff. And you will have a digital identity, right? Because resident mode doesn't work unless people know you're a person, right? Now that digital identity could be an alt identity. It doesn't have to be who you are. It could be a role play thing. It could be a character in a game, but it's still about a person, an identity. So examples include being active in social media, joining in discussions, commenting on things, but it doesn't have to be about social media type platforms. There's lots of people that everybody will know somebody who's really socially present in email, for example. They're really resident in email. That's where they chat. That's where they maintain relationships. They're social in email. So it's not about a specific technology. It's about a mode of engagement. Okay. In the middle of the continuum is a kind of, so let me go the other way. So at the extreme end of resident, that activity is probably highly visible online. Okay, so maybe completely open and anybody online can see it. So you post a video openly on YouTube. There was a period of history where all tweets were were searchable by Google. You know, so it was completely out there online. You don't know who's looking at it. Could be anyone. That's super resident behavior. In the middle of the continuum is where a lot of what goes on happens, which is it's a resident mode of sorts, but it's within a known or community or network of people. So what we're doing now would be somewhere in the middle. Like I can see your faces, you've been chatting, there's a name, I can connect names to ideas. It's somewhat resident, but there's an edge to it, right? Which is actually most of what we do in resident mode is somewhere in there. So that's the continuum. And what we did was we undertook a bunch of research around this, and we realized that context was really important. So your personal context or your institutional context, you could say it was personal or professional, you could break it up however you wanted, was also a really important context when we thought about how we engaged online. And so back in the day, I did my first visitor and resident map, and it looked like this. So I'm just going to talk through this very briefly before I kind of hand over to you to draw your own maps. So back then, I was all over Twitter all the time. I had a professional persona in there. I also chatted personally as well. So it's at the hard end of resident, and it kind of leaks over from institutional to personal. I've got a blog. The comments are open. It's very much my opinion. It's very much about education. So it's very institutional. It's resident in the sense that it's definitely me talking. And historically, it was somewhat resident because people would comment, right? Then we've got old-fashioned things like Skype, etc., etc. So I'm just going to flip over to the top left-hand quadrant. Email, personal, only ever use it for admin, really. So it's very visitory. It's quite instrumental. It's just about organizing things. And that's my personal email. I've got a work email where I'm probably more chatty in that than I am in my personal email, each their own. At the time, Facebook, I just used like a terrible address book. I never posted anything. I didn't care what anybody else was doing. So it was very visitory and very personal. I think that's an important point. You know, you might imagine that Facebook was fundamentally a residency mode thing, but actually it doesn't have to be, right? The technology doesn't mandate the mode as much as we might imagine. That all changed. I updated it last year, but actually this has shifted already. When I had a quick flick through the slides before the session, I realized this one's now out of date because I've bailed out of Twitter as it became X, and I've become actually much, much more resident in a kind of slightly boring way in LinkedIn because it's a more controlled environment. It's a more professional environment. Actually, the discussions in there are quite a decent quality now. But you can see how it shifted around. Things like WhatsApp have become this huge block on my map because actually there's all sorts of conversations going on that are personal, professional, or you know, it's all a bit of a mess. So WhatsApp's huge. And my blog has become a little bit less resident because there's less chit chat in it. Okay, so you know, the maps shift over time. What's the point of the process? It's really just a useful way of reflecting on how you're engaging kind of across various platforms in various ways. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you to make your own map. And then what's important is, you know, there's two aspects to this. One, it's a useful thing to do to help you reflect on how you're engaging, where you might want to change things you're comfortable with, things you're not comfortable with. But also, it's quite a useful way of, it's like a shared language for visualizing how we're engaging online. So actually, when you show your map to people, you end up, when people show their maps to each other, you end up having really interesting and useful conversations about, oh, why is the LMS or VLE over in Resident? I didn't think that's what that was for, you know, and so on, right? I hope everybody's broadly comfortable with that. What I'm going to ask you to do now, and we'll just spend a few minutes doing this. Don't try and be really neat. It's good just to put down whatever's in your head. Grab a bit of paper, or you can do it digitally. Draw the quadrant, and then start making your own map. It doesn't have to be completely comprehensive or exhaustive. Just, you know, get started on it. And what I'll do is I'll show you the link to the Padlet, but then I'll flip back to this image here because it's a useful reminder. Oh, you'll put the link in the chat there, or you can QR code your way to it. An easy way of doing this is to draw it on paper or do it digitally, and then just take a photograph of it on your phone, and then find your way to the Padlet and upload it that way. So what, you know, again, if you want to clarify anything, then do. But really, you know, if you're happy, let's do this for 5, 6, 7 minutes. Have a go at drawing your own map. There are no right or wrong answers to the map. Just whatever you think makes sense, just jot it down. It's a little bit creative arts from that point of view. I'm gonna run with the idea that what's this? What have you found? Oh no, I'm gonna click on it. It's gonna. Oh no, that's okay.
Wrong link. I'll send the right link.
Okay, that's wandered back to the.
While everyone else can do this later, you can do it now. Click on this article and see, go through the references.
Is it possible to go back one slide back?
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
we
I
can
did
see
say
the
I was going to do. I
axis?
did. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
There you go. There you are. I'm looking at this. I might have seen this one. Yeah, so that's referencing. Oh, that's referencing quite a lot of stuff that I've talked about. I think I've got to that point in my career that when a paper comes out in a particular area, I just look to see whether I've been referenced. It's a really bad academic habit. And if I haven't, I'm like, well, how good can this be? I'm not really like that.
I referenced your this webinar in the 201 session.
Oh, right, yeah. I didn't spot that. That's nice.
Quoting, we confuse ownership with capabilities.
Oh, right. Yeah, I wish I could remember who'd said that, but it's a useful idea. Right. That's going straight into my Zotero.
This is how you pronounce it in English, obviously.
What, Zotero?
Yeah.
No, it probably isn't. I probably made that up. Zotero. Yeah, I probably would pronounce it that way.
Yeah.
That's probably the first
But
time
I
I've
had
said it
to
out.
think about which program you're meaning, referring to. Um, and
Yeah, lovely. I've got that. I will read that later. Okay, so when you feel like you've got enough of a map, as I say, it doesn't have to be finished. We'll keep mapping for a couple of minutes yet, and then I'm going to ask you to upload kind of what you've got so far to the Padlet. So I'm going to go and find the Padlet myself. Boy, how would you pronounce Zotero?
yeah, but all my life, so to speak, I said Zotero.
Oh, that's all right. That's okay. I mean, that's basically the same, but with a different emphasis, isn't it?
Yeah, slightly. But
I'm quite often wrong about that.
yeah,
I'm not very neat with those things.
I asked my colleagues at the library how they pronounce it, but this is a Swedish pronunciation, and
Yeah, well, there you go.
half German, half Swedish, half I don't know.
I think that sounds legit to me.
And let us know if we should go through how to upload again your maps. The user interface of Padlet is pretty slick, but
A map has appeared.
yes. So on your mobile phone or on the computer?
On the computer.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that.
That looks like the first one was probably a mobile phone because it's come out at 90 degrees, which is a bit of a mobile phony thing, which is fine. There's a second one.
So if you're on a computer, and I think in a mobile as well, there's a circle in the lower right-hand side and then a plus sign, and then you click on it, and then you can just find an icon for the image representing an image upload. And you could write something, a headline or some text, but you don't need to. And you just click submit then. I think it's submit.
So, you know, in a 60 seconds time or so, as if you're comfortable enough with where you've got to, then upload it. The thing about maps is they're never really finished. You think you sort of think you've finished it, and then you realize there are other things. So it's not really about trying to finish something. It's about doing enough of something that it's useful to share and reflect on. Oh, one disappear. Yeah. So that's now rotated by 90 degrees. Here come a few more. Thanks for doing this. It's always a pleasure seeing these things appear, especially in an online session. I don't know why. I think it's something about, you know, different pictures, different handwriting, different bits of paper. It's quite it gives, for me anyway, it's a nice form of presence, of like human presence, to see through the work, the fact that everybody does it slightly differently, and you can sort of sense there's a little bit of a person's character in their map from how they've chosen to do it, whether it's pen or paper or digital, or, you know, like here we've got one on graph paper, and, you know, there's one on line paper. I don't know, that they always look a bit different, and it's sort of, there's a messiness to it that I quite like. That it's something I keep meaning to write about, but I probably haven't got enough. It's probably not enough of an idea, but there's something about the internet that is quite hard to be messy online. So I quite like.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you give us that scan code again?
Yeah,
for that
absolutely.
Padlet?
Yeah. Go for it. There's me just pontificating. Pontificating, that doesn't translate well, does it? That's a strange word. Musing.
And there we will need to share our results, right?
Yeah.
Is it possible to put a link to the chat?
Yeah, there's one. Can you repost actually?
Yeah, I copy. Wait a second. Now,
Thank
if you
you.
look at the bottom of the chat, there's a.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
I like the way you
And
called it results as well. That made it sound quite fancy.
And if you're on a mobile phone, then there's the plus, at least on my Android phone, on the home page, on the web through a browser, there's a plus in the middle of the end of the lower end of the screen. And if you're in a browser on your computer, then you have a plus sign.
Yes, I see. Thanks.
Yeah, like a white plus
Got
on
it.
a.
Yes.
Yeah, got excellent.
Okay, so what I'm going to do as people are uploading, I'm just going to I'm going to share my way. This is going to get a little bit kind of sharing inception, because we've all been in those situations. I'm going to share the Padlet into Zoom, and I'm going to just sort of quasi-randomly pick a map, and then and if you're up for it, then if you want to chat through your map, then you get on the mic and we'll have a chat about it. If not, that's fine. Or if you just want to say something in text chat. So I'm going to pick this one. I'm going to pick the graph paper one. I don't know why. So whose is this map?
Mine, Badia.
Hello.
Hello.
So do you want to talk us through why it looks like this then? What's going on here?
Wow. Okay. Actually, as I understood, as much as we become active citizens of the platform, we are using and we are open to leave traces from us, it becomes more of being residents.
Yeah.
So, I'm an architect, so our job is based on mostly several communications, interactions, common works. So actually, there are some platforms we're using on our projects in the school with students. which is based on building information modeling with Revit or Navisworks.
Yeah.
So that is sometimes from very personal to very much being resident of it. I am using it, so I wrote it as BIM. And WhatsApp and personal email really actually they meet up in MS Team.
Yeah.
This is a platform at my school is mainly introduced us during COVID, and we get used to it. So on sharings and everything. And so I try to organize it that way. I don't know how much you said there's no correct or incorrect.
Oh, I mean the thing is, I think that the value here is you talking through it, right? The map only tells us so much, but it's interesting to hear why your map looks like it does. So it's your way of coming to an understanding of your own engagement. I'm sure plenty of other people in the group here will recognize why that looks like that. And one of the things that's interesting about it is there's a lot overlapping in the middle there, isn't there? So there's a lot going on that's sort of in the middle where similar bits of communication might end up in different platforms or whatever it might be. And I think, you know, we all have to figure out how to manage, you know, what our online environment looks like. Now that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm gonna move to a different one. We'll do a few. We're not going to do all of them. So please don't be either too pleased or too disappointed if I don't pick your map. It's not a scientific process. I'm going to have to do this one because it looks unusual. So whose is that? And do you want to speak to it?
Hello, it's my map.
Hi.
I think I use Instagram and Twitter a lot.
Yeah.
And I feel as a resident there because I constantly check my accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And in my country context, we use Twitter as a kind of newspaper.
Okay.
If I don't check it, I feel I will stay behind of everything.
Yeah.
That's why I prefer using it. And WhatsApp is a part of my life. I use it for my personal life and also institutional life, chatting with my colleagues, but also with my family and friends. And again, I constantly check it. That's why I feel like a resident.
Yeah.
But Outlook and Teams are generally more for more institutional purposes.
Yeah.
I get my institutional emails and chatting with my colleagues on Teams. So that's why I feel more like a visitor. If I get a notification from Outlook or Teams, I feel a bit annoyed.
So
and
you're trying
frustrated.
to keep it compartmentalized. You're trying to keep it under control.
Yeah, that's why I prefer using them just for institutional
Yeah.
purposes, let's
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, and it's true. And what's interesting about that is the business model of most platforms is to attempt to take over as much of your map as possible. Like they're always trying to get as much of your attention as possible. And it over the years, it's become increasingly harder to keep things under control, right? Because they're always finding ways of switching on notifications or telling you this or getting excited about that. And so in terms of managing our relationship with the online environment and with our job and social life and all the rest of it, it does require quite a conscious thinking through of managing these spaces, right? And how they pester us or whether they're telling us useful things. So what I've found with this process is that sometimes it's a useful way of just becoming more conscious about your relationship with the online environment and whether you're making active choices like you are to manage it, or whether quite often the case with students, with undergraduates, they actually feel just like they're being pushed around by it. And they don't feel like they've got control over it. It's like it's bullying them almost. So thank you. That's really useful. I'm gonna do one more and then I'm gonna move on. But obviously the maps are still in the Padlet. You can have a look around each other's. They're quite a useful thing. Top tip. They're quite a useful thing to blog about. You know, reflecting on your maps quite a useful thing to blog about. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go for this one just because it's colourful and quite resident-y. Whose is this?
Yeah, hello, that's mine.
Okay, excellent
Yeah,
use of transparency there. So top marks for that.
thanks. Yeah, well, I think that's kind of far from finished. I had to
Yeah.
think a lot of why I don't have that much on the personal and visitor.
Yeah.
And most of the things I use for the, like, I mean, digitally, all these things, they are related or somehow related to work. So, and then many things overlap naturally because it's, well, publishing simultaneously to different platforms
Yeah.
with
So it's quite
different
busy, isn't it?
messages.
It must
It
be.
is,
So
yeah.
you've got a lot going on. So
Yeah. At the
your
same
map
time,
looks. Sorry, carry on.
yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah, one thing that at the same time I'm thinking institutional, it's not just my university job. I also kind of work as a private designer consultant. So then
Yeah.
I kind of have to add this extra complexity to think
Yeah.
what is there for what hat I'm wearing at the moment, for example. So, but yeah, it would be a bit less busy maybe if I would have to take this separately.
Yeah, and so your map is perhaps indicating that the way that you work is that there's just things arriving and you're not particularly compartmentalizing work or time. You're sort of quite available and you're quite responsive, or are you trying to keep it under control?
Yeah, I would rather say that I'm rather content creator on the platforms that just
Gotcha.
looking what happening around. So I don't try to don't spend much time to see what people doing, except I need to do it for the research. I rather create and put it there. So I think this like a right side of the thing that residents, I also kind of enrich it a little bit with the idea that I am contributing, not just following something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and that's a good point that you're making there, because pretty much all forms of residency involve like a two-way street. Like you're putting something into it as well as getting something out of it. And that, going back to the Kevin Kelly quote at the start, that idea of everything being connected together, the single biggest thing that's happened with the digital is the fact that we can all contribute. It's not a one-way process, whereas certainly with knowledge, information, broadcast media, traditional physical publishing, it's often like just coming towards you, and you can't, you can think about it, you can reflect on it, but you can't put anything back. So certainly there's something fundamental to that idea of residency that you're going to be contributing as well as consuming, if we want to put it in those terms. Okay, thank you. So I hope you can see
Thank you.
You can see how those were different. You can have various conversations in your PBL groups about your maps. As I say, just to sort of round up this little bit of it, I think to my mind, it's a useful process to help people to figure out how they can have more agency, more self-determination in what becomes a very complex environment. So take active choices in how they're engaging, rather than just sort of have this thing that they haven't had a chance to think about. We're all doing this, right? We're all doing this in various ways, but we rarely talk about it beyond a single platform at a time. So yeah, I hope you found that useful. I'm going to flip back to the slides. I say that as if I could do it super slick, but it won't be super slick. It will be slightly creaky. Can anybody see the slides? There they are. That's what I get for being untidy. Right. So the next slide says discussion. We did that. So that's good. What I'm going to do is I've just got 10 minutes. I just want to sort of go through some sort of so what with the map, some of the things that people have done with the mapping and with the idea over the years. But also just a quick bit of kind of high level theory, which I found useful in my own work, which is this idea of hierarchy and network. Okay, so the institutions we work for or work with will by their nature be somewhat hierarchical in terms of how they decision make, in terms of the way power is distributed. But the internet is largely networked, okay? So it's operating on a different paradigm. Education historically has been very hierarchical, as you can imagine, but and I think theories like social constructivism and connectivism are really interesting ways of exploring what does it mean if education is actually networked and not hierarchical. And certainly connectivism is a theory that's worth looking into from Downes and Siemens, which is saying, well, the internet is a networked environment. So given the structure of it as a network, does that mean that we can engage in teaching and learning and education in a networked manner, which we all do variously, right? So we all do a bit of both. So I'm not saying, I think what's important to me is what's the sweet spot between these two things. Certainly within a university education, you need some hierarchical stuff, you need some network stuff. What's the relationship between the two? What I've found, so I mean, in theoretical terms, you could say that you've got constructivism is largely hierarchical and connectivism is largely networked. These are things that you can, there are Wikipedia pages on these things if you've not heard of them before. They're really interesting. And it's also really interesting to reflect on perhaps what your approach is. How do you go about teaching and learning relative to these ideas? For me, the important, what I've spotted in my university is quite often when something's contentious or controversial, it's because it's overlapping between these two ideas. And some people in the room are thinking about the thing hierarchically and some are thinking about it in a networked way. And they're kind of not sort of meeting in the middle somehow. So it's quite a useful way of unpicking complex situations. And I think it's huge in educational terms, right? So if you teach and learn on a constructivist hierarchical basis, is going to be a very, very different atmosphere to connectivist. And there are pros and cons to both, right? There are genuinely pros and cons to both. Interestingly, ONL this is a quote that I got from a blog a few runs of ONL ago, and interestingly, it's extremely connectivist and networked. And this person is reflecting on how they sort of come to the course with a kind of content-based view of education, and then discovered there isn't really any content, because the content is the discussion as you go through the course. And so the course itself is really a scaffolding and to facilitate various forms of discussion and reflection from various different people. So it's in that philosophy. In my university, because it's specialist creative arts, I always talk about the idea that we're trying to create the conditions for creativity. We're not saying here's how you should be creative. We're trying to create those conditions through various means, and then hopefully, a little bit like tending a garden, hopefully really good work emerges and really good learning emerges. So this was the first mapping workshop I ever did, and when I looked at the maps, it struck me that Facebook was in different places on the maps. So as I mentioned earlier, another useful thing is the fact that actually the technology doesn't mandate the mode of engagement. And so if you say to students things like, do you have an Instagram profile? Are you in WhatsApp? Are you using email? They might say yes, but that doesn't mean that you know what they're doing or how they're doing it. And you saw the VNR idea, the visitor residence idea, can sort of help reveal that. And sometimes that's why when you say, oh, we're all going to use WhatsApp, it still sort of a bit doesn't quite work, because different people think different things about what authentic use of that platform ought to be, right? And there's actually no agreement about it. So it's worth having that discussion. We just got 5 minutes. I'm going to go through some maps that other people have done. Thanks, Jörg. That's handy. Yeah. Yeah, I do think the zone of proximal development is always useful. And I guess what you could say, if you go with the scaffolding idea, is scaffolding a hierarchy or a network? What shapes the scaffolding? Is it nodes and spokes? Is it a grid? How big are the gaps? All of it is quite a useful way of thinking about what's going on educationally. And again, this is not to say one's better than the other. It's just handy to reflect on it. I'm going to go through some maps very Yeah, so that's Dave Cormier's territory, rhizomatic, emergent, networked. I'd say, ONL is very rhizomatic, and I'd say something like this mapping process is good at creating the conditions for kind of a healthy rhizomatic emergence. Right, I've gone 100% academic and artsy there, but I think that's probably what's going on. So other maps, having an incredibly well-populated map doesn't mean that you're winning at life necessarily. This person was a PhD student. They said all social media was evil and just trying to steal your data and sell you things. This was their world. I suspect their PhD was excellent. Who knows, right? But it's not about filling up the whole map. This one was a very, very young student at school, and I think that what this map is saying is everything's just everything. It's just in a lump. They hadn't developed enough of a kind of learner identity to start separating these things out. I'm going to skip a few because we're a bit short on time, but you get different interpretations. Like, for example, this person was involved in about 5 or 6 different things in their life. So somebody was mentioning that they were, that they were also an independent designer as well as another job. And so this person decided to lay out their map they separated it out, right? And then you get maps like this, where, people do like fun, people who love icons, right? I'm not sure what that tells me, actually. That's not a great map, to be honest. It's just sort of, it's like they're littering almost. Anyway, I've used it as a research method, and various people have used it as a research method. So this is results. There's a paper out there somewhere with this written up, and we did about 380 maps with lots of different students, and then I just looked to see which areas of the maps were most populated, and I ran all the numbers and normalized the data. The key thing here is on the bottom left here is when you look at age here, and you look at people whose maps were kind of quite evenly coated, right? That people with maps of that layout were evenly distributed across different age brackets, which would somewhat counter Prensky's point. That's what I liked about this research. It was me going, hang on a minute, it's not about how old you are. It's absolutely not about how old you are. It's about what you think is important. And then some people will annotate maps in various ways. Direction of travel is quite interesting. This one's becoming more resonant. This one's becoming more personal. Annotation, sort of beginning to describe what's inside the boxes. And then just lastly, because this is one of my favorite maps, is the pink area on the right there was like aspirational. This was a PhD student who wanted to become like a public digital scholar. And so they've got it says ideal self, not real, but would like to be, and it's got all blogging of research and published stuff, and so I quite like the idea that it's a way of sort of deciding where you want to be more active for whatever reason. You can use the process with other colleagues, you can use it with students. It's a good way of getting a conversation started, and the conversation can go in lots of different directions. It also helps groups get to know each other a little bit as well, so there's no harm in that. So just to finish up, this is from George Siemens, who's very much in and around the kind of connectivism, the rhizomatic stuff, and all the rest of it. And this is probably my all-time favorite educational quote, actually. I don't think I've ever told George that, but I mean, he's a big success. He doesn't need to know. Now that knowledge and networks are abundant, not scarce, the emphasis should be on connections. We, teachers, are the arbiter of connections. So personally, I find that a very positive and useful concept of what it means to teach. So it's not like a kind of gatekeeping, drip feeding kind of thing. Actually, everything's available all the time, everywhere. That's the environment we're in. And so what's important as a teacher is to mediate and be an arbiter of all these various connections and manage that process, or facilitate that process, or engender that conversation, however you might want to put it. So I just want to leave that with you, because I think that's the the mirror to Kevin Kelly quote at the start. So Kevin Kelly back in 1997 was saying, we're going to try and connect everything to everything else. George Seaman is saying, now we've done that, perhaps teachers need to be the arbiter of connections, not the deliverers of knowledge, right? Okay, so I'm going to stop there because I'm out of time. Thank you. Thanks for doing the process, the mapping. There's various bits and pieces of visitor and resident stuff lying around that talk about how to do the mapping and all the rest of it, but I hope you found that useful.
Thank you so much, Dave. Always great to have you with us and for some inspiration and the exercise. Yeah, I hope to see you soon online or physically in Karlstad or anywhere else.
Yeah.
All of us hope to see you again next week for the workshop on individual reflection spaces or blog. Yeah, and have fun in your PBL groups.
All right. Cheers, everyone. I'm going to run. I got a next thing. As always,
Sure.
I do. Cheers.
No worries.
Bye.
Thank you, Dave.
Bye.
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 Thank you.